Well, this is our sixth message in our sermon series called Prophecy to Promise. And as we're covering the first book in that series, the book of Daniel, if you've missed anything along the way in these first 5 weeks, you can always go back on our YouTube page, my YouTube page, and then our Facebook page in order to watch any of those and catch back up. I was on vacation last week, and Pastor Josh covered chapter 5, and it did a wonderful job of being obedient to the Lord and to speak on that chapter of King Belshazzar, the grandson of King Nebuchadnezzar, who saw the writing on the wall that was judging him. God's judgment was literally being written on the wall for him to see, condemning him for his defiling of God's holy, sanctified temple chalices. But more, it wasn't really necessarily the cups that were special. It was the fact that they belonged to the Lord. They were for the Lord and His use. And so he was condemned, and for not honoring God like his grandfather, since his grandfather knew of the holiness of God and had told him he was held to a higher standard of judgment because he knew the truth, versus everyone else who maybe not and never knew of God's holiness. Their judgment was not quite as severe as this grandson, King Belshazzar. So that night he lost his kingdom and he was killed for his actions. Which brings us to the most famous chapter in the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 6. The story of Daniel and the lion's den, which is one of the best known, probably maybe one of the most loved stories in the entire Bible. Little children love it. They love to sing about it. Sunday school teachers, I think, love to teach about it. And it's just one of those stories that I think that there's probably maybe not even a person in this room that does not already know the story or some details of the story. While I was on vacation, my sister-in-law and her husband have 3 little kids all under the age of 3, and they put on this like YouTube video that has a looping videos of like AI-generated Bible songs and things like that. Songs I've never heard before in my life, but Bible songs, and one was this Bible song on Daniel. And I was just fascinated at this story of Daniel and how they make Daniel and the story be like, oh, these fluffy lions, and Daniel sitting having this like cozy time. I think I have a picture, like kind of like a cozy, hey, Daniel and the lion's den, what an awesome story. It's so lovely, and it's awesome how God saved him with his friends, his new kitten friends. But there's this, and so I'm watching, I'm like, that's really not how the story goes. I mean, there's some elements of that that's true, but I guarantee you those lions did not look like that. I have a feeling they looked more like the next picture, if you remember that one, like, hey, buddy, you're going to die. And so, but this story has encouraged the people of God for thousands of years. And why shouldn't it? God saves Daniel, his righteous prophet, and the bad guys in the story, well, they and their families are torn to pieces by the lions. Spoiler alert. And the justice that I think we always kind of seek in our life, like, God, why do those bad people get away with it? Well, in this story, they don't. And so, but along the way, we learn in this book, this chapter, the secret to Daniel's success. He had an active prayer life. And we see that in chapter 6. His prayer and devotion to God continued to flourish in Babylon, even in spite of the spiritually hostile environment. And that's a good place, I feel like, for us to begin, because Christians today live in a world that is spiritually hostile towards believers. I can't remember who I was talking to, but if you just take the evidence, there's one particular religion that has the highest amount of persecutions and deaths. And it's not the Jewish people, it is Christians. If you take the numbers across the world, there are more Christians that are murdered, especially for their faith, because of their faith, than there are any other religions in the world. Why is that? Doesn't make sense. Why? Well, I'll tell you what, there is really a devil, and there is a war against God's God's redeemed people, those that have experienced that. And I think it's my responsibility to remind us as Americans how good we still have it in America. It's not as good as it was 50 years ago or even longer than that, but as Americans, being Christians, we still have it quite well in comparison to those around the world that have to stand up, who stand up for their faith and die or suffer severe punishments because of their faith. All across the world. There are Christians that are being thrown in jail, Christians that are beaten, that are having their families ripped apart, and who are suffering brutal deaths. In America, however, it means our persecution. When we talk about persecution in America, it means being excluded. It means being ridiculed, scorned, maybe financial persecution, and perhaps even some sort of physical pain. But it's nothing compared to the death and jail time that Christians experience all across the world. Our brothers and sisters experience all across the world. And Daniel, this story in chapter 6, is an example that shows us that it's possible to stand for Christ, but not without discomfort. If you don't compromise yourself and your faith, this world will send trouble to your doorstep. Before we jump in, here are two important facts I want you guys to know. That picture I put of the fluffy lions that showed a guy with brown hair, and he looked probably close to my age. That was not the case. Thank you, William, for bringing that back. That was not the case. Daniel was now a very old man, for he came as a teenager, and we can do the math, and he spent somewhere around 66 years at this point in captivity. And he came over as a teenager, then he spent 66 years. You can do the math. He's probably in his late 70s or early 80s at this point. And he is now serving a new king, as Pastor Josh covered last week, King Darius, who rules over the Medo-Persian Empire. So after the end of chapter 5, a new empire who is sieging Babylon has come in. Again, Babylon is Iraq, present-day Iraq. That's where that would have been the headquarters. And now the Medo-Persian Empire, which is Iran, has now come over and has taken over everything that Babylon had at that moment and their own empire. And so now they have expanded to even greater empires, okay, even greater feats. And so this new empire is now taken over with new beliefs, new mindsets, new teachings, new everything. Okay, the names may have changed, empires and kings, but the spiritual challenges are the same for Daniel. But no matter who is in power, Daniel knows that his God is still in charge. As Daniel has done in the past, he will remain faithful when the pressure is on. This chapter opens with Daniel once again promoted to a high office in this new empire, which again tells you something about Daniel. That every new kingdom that comes in, somehow Daniel rises to the crop. And if you remember at the very beginning of Daniel, we read that God has anointed him, that God has given this special favor, that he has the Spirit of God resting on him. And that should tell you what happens when the Spirit of God is on anybody. You tend to become a focal point to this world. That there's evidence of stuff in your life that makes you different from people in this world. And evidently, Darius recognized Daniel as a man of integrity and wanted to make him second in command over his entire kingdom. Now, doesn't that make sense that why he would want a man of integrity like Daniel to be second in command? What would Daniel never do? Betray him. He would never go against him. He would never try to cut him down and take his position. So why wouldn't people want godly, Spirit-filled people to be second behind them? Even if they're pagan, they would want that, right? And so this King Darius recognizes this. And we see this in verse 3. Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other administrators and high officers. Because of Daniel's great ability, the king made plans to place him over the entire empire. Now, I'm going to not read every verse in this chapter. So if you want to use our chair Bibles and look at verse or chapter 6 or your own personal Bible. I'm going to be just flowing through here. And I know you know the story, but it might be good to have that open to go back and see those verses. But because Daniel was going to be made second in command, these other administrators, these other high political figures were fueled by jealousy and greed in their life. And it says in verse 4, the other administrators and high officers began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was handling government affairs, but they couldn't find anything to criticize or to condemn him. He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. So they concluded our only chance of finding grounds for accusing Daniel will be in connection with the rules of his religion. So this is what his enemies discovered when they examined Daniel's life. I have it up here, William, that list. Number one, this is what they discovered when they watched Daniel's life, that he was faithful in his duties. Second thing, he was faultless in his character. And the third thing, he was fervent in his prayers. These are three marks of godliness in a man or a woman's life. As you think about your life and you think about your employment and you're going about your days, I hope that the unbelievers that interact with you on a daily basis see these three things. William, put it back up there. Three things that they see in your life. That you are faithful to the duties that have been given to you, that you are faultless in your character, and that you are fervent in your prayers and devotion to God. The people who watch you will find out what's on the inside of you. They will discover what kind of character you have. Whatever's in your heart will soon come out at some point, sooner or later. And the people will discover the truth about who you really are on the inside. Daniel's enemies had to admit he had no glaring weaknesses, for God's Spirit was on him, and Daniel was completely loyal to his God. Daniel was hated by his colleagues because he had great success, because God had blessed him for his obedience to him. We often see this, especially in sports. In sports, you'll have the greatest player in history. And my wife and I had watched that Michael Jordan. I don't know if it's on Netflix or whatever it is. Help me out, Megan. I don't care. What's the name of the show? The Last Dance. Thank you. We've got some fans out here. Okay, so it was talking about Michael Jordan, who is 100% the best basketball player that's ever walked the face of this earth, other than Jesus if he played basketball. But it's funny to see people talk about him and often say like, "Oh, I couldn't stand him. I don't like him and his character and stuff like that." But they could not refute that he was so great. But they hated him because of how great he was at the game. And as a fan of other teams, I can understand that. If a guy continues to beat you and trounce you, I can see that same thing. And the same thing, Daniel had all this great success that the people couldn't stand him, even though he was a great guy. Probably never said anything wrong to them, never did anything wrong whatsoever. They just hated him because God's favor was on him, and he kept rising to the top, no matter what in his life, because God had blessed him for his obedience to God. But this story teaches us that even when you do the right thing, you are still required to trust God in everything. And doing what is right is no guarantee in your life that everything will go right. Daniel did have one flaw in his life. He was predictable in his daily prayers and his devotion to God. He prayed every day at the same time and in the same way for the 66 years he was in Babylon. So his enemies knew where they could catch him. So they devised a scheme to use the law to trap and to convict Daniel. They asked Darius to pass this 30-day law forbidding anyone to pray to anyone except King Darius. And in effect, they came to King Darius and were like, "Hey, Darius, how would you feel about being God for a month? Just for a month where we just pray to you and praise your name. How would you like that?" And of course, that appealed to a prideful man and it appealed to any person. And so Darius signed the law, but it says in Scripture that it couldn't be repealed even by the king himself if he wanted to not go with it anymore. However, the king didn't know Daniel was the intended target. And as I read this and read of this scheme of these political leaders, my mind was fixed on laws that I have seen try to go into effect and laws that have gone into effect in other countries where even in Canada and even in the UK, they're not allowed to pray on the streets. They're not allowed to talk about Jesus on the streets, or they will be in prison. And I just look at this passage of Scripture, look about this story, and I'm like, it's the same tactic that was used back here in Babylon is being used today to stop the Word of God from being shared, to stop God's people from being God's people. And I would venture to guess that it's surely going to come our way sometime soon in America. For me, I find it so interesting that these political leaders who were trying to trap Daniel knew that he would never conform to the law and would choose to ever disobey his God. My prayer in my life, and I hope it is in your life, is that I would be so dedicated to Christ that my enemies, whether they're people or spiritual, would know that I would never conform and turn my back on Jesus. That's my prayer. So that my enemies know, well, I'm not going to be able to trap him in this. So the only way I'm going to get him is to be able to get him to be obedient to God, and then I can get him in that. That's my faith, my desire is that my faith and devotion to Christ would be predictably loyal, as it was for Daniel. These men knew Daniel would keep on praying just as he had always done in his life. He was predictably faithful to God. His troubles, Daniel's troubles, came not from his weaknesses, but because of his strength. Daniel 6, verse 10, reveals the secret of his greatness. It says, "But when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home, knelt down as usual in his upstairs room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God." When Daniel learned that this decree had been passed, he went home to his upstairs room, and where his windows opened towards Jerusalem, where he pointed towards where the temple was, the temple of God was, 3 times a day he got on his knees and he prayed, giving thanks to God, just as he always did for 66 years. He did it knowing his enemies would catch him at some point. Praying to God, however, was so important to Daniel that he was willing to die for it. Even if it meant death, he did not care. A question for myself and for everyone else in this room as I think about that is that the case for you? Is praying and communicating with the Lord so important to your life that you'd be willing to lay down your life, go to jail, be eaten by lions, that you would not make a negotiation with your prayer? It's easy to think of reasons why Daniel might have disobeyed that law for those 30 days. He could have simply closed the window, right? Daniel could have just shut the blinds and prayed in the darkness and not point towards the temple. So his enemies couldn't see him. Or Daniel could have just not prayed for those 30 days and could have said, it's only 30 days. God will understand. It's only 30 days. Maybe he could have reasoned in his mind, well, God needs me. I'm his prophet over here. So God needs me to be alive. And so just for these 30 days, I'll just not pray and I'll follow this law. Daniel knew the consequences of his actions, but none of those excuses that he probably went through in his mind mattered because God, long ago, Daniel made up his mind that he was going to be loyal and serve God to the end of his days. We read in verse 14 that King Darius now realizes that he had been tricked by these other political leaders. And he likes Daniel. It's pretty clear in chapter 6 that he likes Daniel. And immediately he begins seeking loopholes to prevent Daniel from being thrown into the lion's dens. He's searching. It says that he was deeply troubled that the king could not, however, repeal this law that was put into place because that would make him weak and ineffective. So the law must stand and Daniel must go into the lion's den. But Darius it says, is rooting for this old man, rooting for his friend. In verse 16, it says, the king said to him, "May your God, whom you serve so faithfully, rescue you." And Daniel is thrown into the lion's den, a pit dug into the ground with an entrance from the side for the lions, and a huge boulder. It says a huge boulder was placed over the top so there could be no possible escape. It was a crude and very effective form of capital punishment for people. No one ever got out alive, for they starved the lions to make them extra hungry so that they would definitely want to devour whatever prey was sent down their way. So Daniel was seemingly a dead man when he was thrown down there, or so that's what the political leaders thought. Notice Daniel did not know what would happen in his life. He doesn't make a deal. We don't read about what he was praying to God during that time. He was praying. He didn't make a deal with God saying, "Oh, if you save me, I'll do this. God, if you do this for me, I'll do this for you." There was no deals that were made. And we see Daniel was not afraid to die for the Lord. He may have suspected, maybe possibly, that God would rescue him out of this situation. But even if he didn't, it wouldn't have changed Daniel's obedience. Which again, that mindset of even if he doesn't save me, is the same mindset that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had. Even if God doesn't rescue me, I will still not bow my knee and worship your idol. It's the same thing for Daniel. Even if God doesn't rescue me, I will still pray and be obedient to him. I'm sure when Daniel hit the bottom, he slid in the dirt and could hear the sound of the lions breathing and even maybe growling. But there were no roars as he's sitting in the darkness, because it's sealed up dark. There's no teeth ripping at his flesh. And we read in verse 22, it says that my God sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths so that they would not hurt me. For I've been found innocent in his sight, and I have not wronged you, your majesty. See, Daniel said angels came to rescue him. I wonder if that, as I just read that, and just from my perspective, did they talk? Did Daniel's like, "Hey, what's going on?" So, were the angels there to comfort him? I have no idea if the lions were his friends. I don't know if, you see those pictures, those movies that are really cool where the lions are have these human friends and these guys walk up and these lions hug them and it's really cool. Or if God just shut the mouths of lions, they were really hungry and the angels just made sure the lions' mouths were shut the whole time. Or if God created like Adam and Eve moment where the lions reverted back to their old ways of being friends with humans and I don't know if he just laid there in a pile of lions for the night, had the best sleep of his life, with the lion's manes all around him. I don't know. But it's spectacular to think about. But it's also terrifying to think about those first 5 minutes sliding down into this pit of lions. That night the king tossed and turned, paced the floor, and he refused entertainment and eating. Early in that morning, it says that he rushed to the lion's den, hoping against hope that Daniel's God had protected him and spared his life. Reading that, it tells you something, that there's something in King Darius that shows that he has hope and faith in Daniel's God. May your God, remember he said, may your God save you and rescue you. And so he's hoping and he's running in that hopes and expectation that it happens. Kind of like when we were kids and we were it's supposed to snow overnight and we go to bed and we're run to the window and open it up and it's Vandalia, so there's no snow. Right? And so, but he's running, he's hoping and praying that it happened, that his God rescued him. I bet he had heard the stories from Daniel about the fiery furnace and heard the stories of God's faithfulness and all the different things that his God had done over history. That he parted the Red Seas, that he conquered the Egyptians, that he had conquered the land of Canaan. He's done all these different things. And he had believed. He had believed that God, if that God is really real, then that God can save Daniel. But I want you to take notice of something. God didn't prevent Daniel from being thrown into the lion's den, did he? The Lord instead went with him in the lion's den. When he came rushing to check on Daniel, he cried out, Daniel, in verse 20, Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God whom you serve so faithfully able to rescue you from the lions? Did he do it, Daniel? And in verse 23 tells us why the miracle happened. It says, Daniel trusted in his God, and his God shut the mouths of the lions. Consider just for a second, and I know this is kind of random, consider the lion's perspective of all of this. Like they're starving in this cave, and they get finally the first meal in a long time, and it's thrown down there, and all of a sudden as they're like, oh yeah, oh, there's an angel, or like, and they can't move, and their instinct of killing and eating has been taken away, and they have to sit all night. Kind of be like, for maybe some of us, like if I had to sit in a room for like 3 hours with like a steak from Popeyes, like that'd be really hard. That'd be really difficult. That would be a real stretch for me to be able to handle that for that long. And they're just sitting there for that long, and then they're starving during that time. And God says, no, you can't have this. He belongs to me. But then we read in verse 24, then the king gave the orders to arrest the men who had maliciously accused Daniel, and he had them thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and their children. I know that's hard to swallow. The lions leaped, no pun intended on that one. The lions leaped on them and tore them apart before they even hit the floor of the den. So God's judgment and wrath was poured onto them. Then Darius offers public praise to Daniel's God in verse 26 through 27, and I encourage you to read it. But it basically is saying, who's the living God? Daniel's God is praised, saying he is the living God who endures forever. He rescues and he saves, and he is the one who delivered Daniel from the lions. What an amazing words coming from the lips of a pagan king. Perhaps King Darius, as did Nebuchadnezzar, started to believe. Daniel's story demonstrates that if you make up your mind to serve only God, you do it even in the midst of persecution and trials in your life. If we want to walk with Christ, we too must come to that same conclusion that Daniel made, that I will worship God in every circumstance, even in tough, difficult, with possible death knocking at the door. I will remain faithful. And Jesus warns us of this because he's so good in that. And he warns us of what is heading towards us when we accept him. In Luke chapter 14, verse 26 to 28, listen what it says. He gives us a warning before accepting me, before following me. Listen to what I have to say. If you want to be my disciple, you must, by comparison, hate everyone else. Your father and your mother, your wife and children, brothers and sisters. Yes, even your own life. Otherwise, you cannot be my disciple. If you do not carry your own cross and follow me, you cannot be my disciple. But don't begin until you count the cost of what it means to follow me. Now, Jesus is not necessarily saying that you have to hate your brothers and sisters, hate your mom and dad. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, no, but if it was brought between me and them, you need to choose me. You need to choose me. And so he says, before you make this decision to ask me to be the Lord of your life, please count the cost. Understand what my requirement is for this, that you must die to yourself daily, that you must carry the weight of the cross every single day. Count the cost before you make this decision, telling us that there is going to be hard, difficult times and seasons, so make sure that you're in it for the long haul. Make sure that you understand what the cost is going to be for you. It is a free gift for you to receive, but it's going to cost you everything to follow him. Christians living for God should expect opposition. Daniel had opposition and he still lived a blameless life. If you set out to live for the Lord, sooner or later trouble will come for you. We are light in darkness. There's a distinction between that. We are salt in this world. There is a distinction between salt and the bitterness of salt and this world. So we're going to be the opposition of this world. And this is part of what Jesus meant when he spoke about taking up your cross daily and following him. If God can deliver Daniel, however, from the lion's den, he can surely deliver each of us from the darkness. Generations of Christians have taken strength from this story because in the end, the hero of the story is not Daniel. It's the God who saves. That same God is sovereign over those who plot against you in your life, and he is sovereign over the lions who surround you in your life. Take heart, my friends. Trust in God. If he has brought us into certain trials in our life, God is faithful to sit with us in those lions' dens. God always delivers in his own time and in his own way, but it might not be the way you want or expect him to. That doesn't mean we are not subjected, however, to the darkness. Just like Daniel was subjected to the darkness, and just like Jesus is subjected to the darkness, you will be subjected to the darkness. Daniel was thrown in a hole, not knowing if it was his end. But he knew that he was promised by God that God would be with him through it all. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego weren't spared the fiery furnace. They were spared in the flames of the fiery furnace. Daniel wasn't spared from experiencing the lion's den. He was spared in the darkness in the lion's den. He still was allowed to be thrown into the lion's den. A lot of us prayed to God saying, please, God, don't send me into the lion's den. Please, God, don't make me have to feel this hurt. Please don't make me have to experience this pain in my life. We often pray that prayer, and I think every time we pray that, God says, do you have faith in me? Do you trust me? Because I promise you that if you do trust me, if you will believe that I have a good plan for your life and you trust me, you will forever be changed on the other side of the furnace and the other side of the lion's den in your life. Can you imagine, just for a second, just for one moment, can you imagine what Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were like after Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walked with Jesus in the fiery furnace? Can you imagine what kind of a faith they had in God from that point on? Can you imagine what Daniel's faith, how much it increased by walking and hanging out in the lion's den with the angel and the lions? On the other side of that. But yet we say, no, God, I don't want any problems. No, I don't want to go through any of those moments in life. Please, no, God, I don't want to go through any pains or hurt in my life. And what happens is our faith stays small. Our trust in God stays very, very small. Sometimes God doesn't calm the storms in our life because the storm isn't your problem. Sometimes he lets it rage so that he can calm you. The trial isn't meant to break you. It's meant to build you up, change you, transform you to be more like Jesus. See, everybody wants peace, but nobody ever wants the pain that produces peace in your life. But growth doesn't happen during comfort, and strength doesn't increase in your life without some sort of adversity in you. Storms help reveal who you are. It's kind of like toothpaste. If you take a tube of toothpaste, you don't know what's on the inside of it. You assume it's toothpaste, but when you squeeze it with adversity, what happens? You see what's on the inside. Toothpaste. Trials will strip the lies and expose our weaknesses. It tears away any facade so God can show you what is real about your faith. It exposes the truth. So don't pray away storms and trials in your life. Let it do its work. Let God shape you in your storms and trials. My sister, who passed away 12 years ago, dealt with this debilitating illness for 9 years that ended up taking her life. And she either discovered this phrase or made it up herself, I'm not sure. But it's one that I will always remember her by. When she had this debilitating illness that deformed her body and caused her the inability, she was in pain all the time. But she came up with this phrase, and it says, when you're down to nothing, God is up to something. When you're down to nothing, God is up to something. If God has allowed storms in your life, not that ones that you have created on your own from being a rebellious, sinful person, but storms in your life that you are not in control of, that it just happens in your life, that's outside of your control. If God has allowed those storms in your life, a great question to ask is, God, what is it you want me to see? What is it that you want me to see in this storm? And God, what is it that you want it to change inside of me? Because clearly you want me in this. You're not punishing me. If I haven't done anything wrong, you're not punishing me. There's something I'm missing. There's something I'm not seeing. There's some work you want to do in me. And it would be far better, in my opinion, personal opinion, to surrender and submit quicker than to fight against it. But what do? We fight against it. God, take me out. God, why would you do this to me? God, I don't understand you. Why would you do this to me? Instead of saying, God, I think you want to do something to me, so let's get to work. Let's get working. Let's get working. It hurts far worse when you fight. It hurts far worse when you stop. It hurts far worse when you fight against God's will. Definitely. I've experienced that in my own life. Look at Daniel. He had peace entering the lion's den, trusting in God's sovereignty. There's peace when you trust the Lord's will for your life, and even if it involves walking in deep valleys. Instead of saying, why me, God? Why do I have to suffer? We should look at our situations as God chose me for this moment. God chose me for this season of life. And if it requires difficult trials, as we've read throughout scriptures, like guys like Job and other people, if it involves trials, God must have big plans for your life. William, will you get that video queued up, please? Church, I want you to hear me on this. Most of the time, God's spiritual preparation in your life comes packaged as pain. God's spiritual preparation comes packaged as pain. There's a video, and if you had the box of Kleenexes are underneath your chairs, just want to give you a heads up. I want you to see when we're talking about this preparation and pain and God putting you in trials, I want you to see this short video.
Why did God give you cancer? Because God allowed it, right? Because God is in control.
Because he chose me.
And why did he choose you?
Because I'm a special boy.
You're a special boy. You are. But you've been through so much pain. Why did God say yes to that?
Because he chose me to do it.
And are you mad at God? At all?
No.
Why?
Because I'm glad that he chose me and not one of like Maddie or Emma.
Why?
Because then they're gonna have to go through this.
And you don't want them to. Okay. Why is Daddy crying?
Because I have to go through this.
I wish I was going through it. I wish I had cancer so that you wouldn't have to have it. But God said no, huh? You know, it's hurt Daddy and Mommy so much to see you go through everything. I have a question. Why do you still smile?
Because even though I have pain and stuff, but God still makes me happy.
Yeah?
And I don't like be sad or mad at God.
You know, hon, every single day you smile. That beautiful smile. Even when we're in the hospital, you smile. You always smile. And do you know that your smile has helped a lot of people? Yeah.
Don't just look at life from the perspective of pain, but see your pain through a perspective of purpose. Realize that God may be doing something in you before he can do something through you. I've heard it said like this: when God wanted to make David a king, he didn't give him a crown. He gave him a giant and a jealous king trying to kill him. When God wanted to raise Joseph up to rescue his people, he didn't give him a shortcut. God made him a slave and a prisoner. When God wanted to make Moses his people's leader, he didn't give him a stage. He gave them a wilderness and a mountain. A lot of times when you think God is breaking you, maybe he is building you up for his purposes for you. God doesn't give us what you expect in life. He gives you what you need to become everything that he died for you to become. His will is what matters most. Our enjoyment and pleasure shouldn't come from the comforts of this world and from not experiencing pain. The Bible reminds us clearly that this is not our home. If you belong to Christ, this is not your home. And so our eyes should be fixed on the things above, the things that are eternal, on God. James 1:12 says, God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. Afterwards, they will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. And it says in Romans 8:17 through 18, it says, and since we are his children, we are his heirs. In fact, together with Christ, we are heirs of God's glory. But if we are to share his glory, we must also share in his suffering. Did you hear that? We must also share in his sufferings. Yet, what we suffer now is nothing compared to the glory he will reveal to us later. Do you understand that? You may suffer for a short season in life, and it may end in your death if you're faithful enough to experience that. But the ending is eternity. It's eternal glory with him. So whatever the world sends our way, whatever destruction may come our way, whatever lion's den may come our way, whatever trial may come our way, the enemy can never take away what has been promised to me in eternity and held in Jesus' hands. And so I live my life knowing that there's going to be struggles, people not liking me, people wanting to stab me in my back, maybe even murder me. But it doesn't matter to me. The enemy's going to come after me because I'm doing something right. And nothing that the world can do to me can ever take away the greatest thing that this world can never give me. This world can do all sorts of great things for me, can offer me great things, temptations, and all sorts of things that I do enjoy. Going on vacations, being with my kids, being family, doing all these different things that I do enjoy, but this world can never give me the one thing that is the greatest thing. Kissing Jesus. Kissing his feet. Holding him. The world can't take that away. It can take my breath away. It can end my life. It can take away my peace. It can take away comfort, all the other things, but it cannot take away what has been promised and held on to and paid for by Jesus Christ in his blood. Can never. The goal is not to stand before the Father and hear, well done, good and successful servant. Well done, good and influential servant. Well done, it is well done, good and faithful servant. Faithfulness is waking up in the morning and saying, God, how can my day reflect your love, your truth, your unity to this beautiful yet broken world around me? Use me however you see fit. If you want to live for Christ and to build God's kingdom, expect to be thrown into the lion's den. Expect it. But if you trust God through the lion's den, what an experience it will be. What an experience it will be in your life to see God move and reveal himself in that way. My question for all of us this morning is, what trials are you going through? And what lessons and changes is God wanting to do in your life that you're running away from instead of embracing them and asking God, what are you trying to teach me and changing me? Would you please stand?